I'm Angela White. I'm 62. I live in the Lake District with my partner. I have 3 children and 3 small granddaughters. I'm now retired, but I have had 2 careers, the first of which was in the computer industry, where I worked for 15 years, discovering that fundamentally I'm an analyst. And I worked my way up till I had my own, worked for myself basically as a business and management consultant. But in my early 30s, I went to medical school to become a doctor, which is something that I'd always wanted to do. I then did my surgical training, passed the exams, and I specialised in trauma and orthopaedics. I also at that time developed a special interest in trauma in older people, such as hip fracture and their rehabilitation. But throughout my medical career, I used my skills from my first career to help improve services and outcomes for patients. I've also been a trustee with An Age UK. I've represented the voluntary sector in South Lakeland on a local government health and wellbeing forum, and I also chaired that forum for 3 years. And through my career and through those roles, I've gained different perspectives on issues affecting people as we age, and that is shaping what I'm doing today. If I go back to the mid-noughties, around 2006 and 7, I had 3 close family members who became seriously ill and died within 4 months of one another. I didn't actually give myself any time off. Like many people in their late 40s, early 50s, it's a point in where you're reaching the sort of the higher echelons of your career, and work becomes all-encompassing. So, and at that time, I had 3 leadership roles in the organisation that I worked for, and work was always piling up. So, with work and teenage children and the home, there really wasn't any time for me. So, I had, I think, 2 weeks off after the 3rd of my family members died. Threw myself into work, and over the next few years, I became not only overworked, but also overweight, unfit, and unhappy. I gained glimpses of myself periodically through that time, but I didn't initially do anything about it until about 2009, when I had a bit of illness myself. And I decided that if I didn't start to do something about myself, I wouldn't be able to help other people for much longer. So I started what I call my small steps, now call my small steps when I look back on them, to improve my own health. And about 3 years into that, in 2012, at the age of 53, there's a whole story about this, but in Pracy, I started running and was introduced to ultras. I supported a friend doing a Lake District challenge called the Josslyn Lakeland Challenge. She was hugely inspiring, but I also met many other inspirational people along the way. I then learned how to cycle and to swim, did some triathlon, but ultras are really the thing that I spend my time focusing on. I'm not fast, I'm a back of the pack runner or shuffler, but what I found was I could keep going, and I'm absolutely fascinated by what your body will do when you ask of it. So I'd done various distances around, I'd done things like the Howth Hobble at 32 miles, the inaugural Open Adventures Lakes in the Day, 50 miles, which I've done a few times now. And then in late 2015, Open Adventure advertised the Northern Traverse, which it was a 190-mile ultra, coast to coast, west to east across the country, from St. Bees to Robin Hood's Bay. And I saw this advert, and all I could think of was, who on earth in their right mind would do something like that? I was still very new to the world of adventure racing and ultras, and didn't know much about these things. All I could think of was that there would be lots of very fit young men racing across the country. But a little voice in my ear whispered, you know what, this could be sponsorship worthy. And the reason for that is that one of those deaths I mentioned earlier on was my husband, Alan, who died from a brain tumour. And our first little granddaughter, Poppy, was born earlier in 2015, and she would never know him and he would never know her. So I decided that I had no idea if I could run 190 miles, but I would raise money for the brain tumour charity and have a go. So that is what I did. Often when touched by tragedy, that's why people do actually raise sponsorship or decide to do some of these daft things to prevent things happening to other people. Anyway, moving on, I've always been concerned and increasingly concerned about health inequalities, particularly experiences of people with older people with poor health. And I found that I was keen to try and combine the running that I was doing with my experience and expertise, and the fact that I was about to be 60 in a couple of years, to see if I could find a way of helping others. Following lots of cups of coffee with different friends and colleagues, an idea was born, and I set up a social enterprise with the intention of encouraging, motivating, and inspiring people to take their own small steps to improve their quality of life. I'm also keen to try and change perceptions of aging and what our expectations of our own older age are. For example, my life expectancy at 62 is 87. So that's another 25 years, a whole career's worth of years. So what am I going to do with it? But it's a message really for anybody approaching the 50s and 60s that life actually can begin there. So going back to Going for Old, which is the name of the social enterprise, I decided we needed to raise awareness. And again, through conversations with other people, and whilst out supporting somebody else doing their own coast to coast for the brain tumour charity, I got the idea that maybe running from John O'Groats to Land's End might be a way of raising that awareness. I'm keen to say that this was never a lifelong dream. I had no ambitions to run the length of the country at any time prior to this, for this reason. But in September 29, I did do that, and I gained a world record as the oldest female to do so. I have to say that none of anything that I've done would have been possible without the support of the huge number of inspirational people that I've met along the way, who've always been so keen to come out and help. Since then, I've become a bit of a motivational speaker. I continue to provide health advice to charities should they ask of it or need it. Involved in some research groups into healthy ageing. And I've been asked to be an ambassador this year to Age Concern Lancashire, who are celebrating their 40th anniversary. I think that's probably it in a very large nutshell.
I love it. It's given so many different indications and different areas and just pinpoints to the journey that you've been on and how it came about. And I'd love to go back to those small steps that you started in order to improve your own health. So you said, you were overworked, you were unfit, you were unhappy, and this was back in 2009. Take us back to, what were those small steps? What did you do to start off your journey?
The very first thing I did was walk. And it was one of the most difficult things to do. So coming home in the evening to just say, right, I'm off out, and leave the house and leave the family and go off and walk for 15 minutes or whatever. It shouldn't be the case, but it is an incredibly difficult thing to do because I was conscious that there were things to do in the house, things to do for the children, things to do, work that needed to be doing. And I felt guilty for taking the time myself to go out and do that. But I started walking initially, and I would walk for 15 minutes or so. What I noticed was how incredibly unfit I was. Extraordinarily unfit, huffing and puffing uphill. I then decided, well, I could take the phone with me and ring people, because it was, normally I'd be walking around the house with the phone crook in the crook of my shoulder, my ear, talking to family members or whatever. whilst doing jobs around the house. But I thought, well, I could do that whilst I was walking. So killing two birds with one stone. And then I decided I could maybe renew some social contacts. So, because when I'd had family illness, three people ill, they were a few hundred miles away from where I live. And so I was running back and forth every weekend, or every other weekend initially, seeing them. And there just wasn't time to keep up with friends. So I started to think, well, maybe I could contact so-and-so and see how they are. And that again, is a really difficult thing to do when you haven't spoken to somebody for months, if not years, to pick up the phone and try and spark up a conversation. There are so many fears, will they even want to talk to me? Will they wonder why I'm calling? Will they put the phone down on me? Will they be rude to me? But actually, it was quite the opposite. People were, very pleased to have heard from me. Most of them had some idea of what had gone on in that awful period. And it was, for the most part, as if we'd been speaking regularly all of that time. Other small steps? Well, looking at what I was eating and what I was drinking, finding different ways to change that, looking at my intake. But I think the 4 areas, or 5 areas really it should be, but it were to do with what I was eating, what I was drinking, physical activity, social activity, and sleep. All of those areas needed attention.
Were you having trouble sleeping?
Yes, I did. Because there was so much going on, I was always much later to bed than I should have been, up earlier, far earlier than I should have been, and the quality of my sleep wasn't great. Whereas now, it's very much different. I regularly get my 8 hours, and if I have a bad night because I've woken in the night and not been able to go back to sleep, it's more of a rarity these days.
I really like how you shared the walking and the talking, because it's that, the social interaction. It's doing something which you're probably not that I know how difficult it can be to get outside and to do something. And I sometimes think, well, there are certain jobs that I know that I have to do. And then I ask myself the question, how can I make it fun? How can I make it enjoyable? Which is what you did with the walking and picking up the phone and speaking to friends and catching up and having that social interaction. For me, it's like if I know I've got to do social media, then I'll get in the bath and do it and do it in the bathtub, and that makes me feel super, super happy. You started taking these small steps to improve your health. You're walking, you've got social interactions, you're focusing on your sleep, your nutrition, what you're drinking, what you're consuming. How did it progress to the running? What was the next step that you took?
So it was a few years later. So it would have been probably December 2011, that I saw an advert from a lady saying that she was setting up a small running group for ladies, for mature ladies who might be returning to running or wanting to start running. So I made a note of the phone number, thinking, well, that might be a good idea. And it took me weeks before I actually picked up the phone to ring her, because every time I thought about it, I thought, well, this is ridiculous. I'll either be too slow, I'll be at the back, I'll hold them all up, I'll look ridiculous, what will people say? They'll laugh at me. I mean, I never have had a huge amount of confidence in myself. And I'm the first person to find 20 ways to kill an idea. So it did take me a number of weeks before I managed to transcend all of those thoughts and pluck the courage up to pick up the phone and speak to her. And when I did, I then ultimately met her and joined her group. I found the most wonderful, inspirational lady who herself had started running at 62. Was at that stage 67. Fairly after meeting her and joining her group, I discovered that she was planning to run the Josslyn Lakeland Challenge, which is a fell run starting in Pooley Bridge and ending in Wasdale across the lakes, 48 miles, 30 peaks and 17,000 feet of ascent. And she was out there recceing this stuff this route with all sorts of stories of bogs and adventure, mini micro adventures that she was having on her recce's. And it all sounded terribly unsafe to me. But also at the same time, I was very curious. So I asked her if I might come and join her, feeling terrified, thinking, I'll never keep up with her. Why am I doing this? But she said yes. And so I bought my first pair of fell shoes and I went out to join her on her recce's. And when I'd moved to the lakes, which is now about 20 years ago, the intention was to be able to go and walk in the hills, but it never happens when you actually live somewhere and life takes over. So I hadn't actually done much of that. But I joined Sandra in the hills, and I just found it so liberating to be up there, just up and above and away from everything else. And in many places, you can still get away from any form of traffic noise, although I have to say the RAF pilots more than make up for it a couple of times a week when they fly through. And one of the things that I should have said about the walking is that when you're on the phone, you miss out the mindfulness of walking, which is just watching the seasons change around you and the stimulation that you get to your well-being from being out in the open air, and whether it's a rural environment or indeed an urban environment. But up in the hills, you've got, it's just raw. It can be, you can have a beautiful sunny day, but more often than not, you're going to have it's going to be wet. The cloud will come down. It'll be blowing a hoolie. You really know you're alive in those conditions, and it just appealed to me at a very deep level. And it did. I suppose it sparked me into life in some ways. Anyway, Sandra, we trained, and she had a failed attempt at the JOS that year. But the following year, once she actually fell and injured herself, but when she was fit to retrain, we carried on training, and I was with her, supported her through the whole thing when she completed it. The following year, when at that time she was the oldest female to complete it. But having had that introduction to the fells and the feelings that I gained from it, and also finding out that it was possible to run, shuffle, plod, crawl, whatever, through 48 miles, I was curious as to what I could do. And that's where my journey started. So I then went on to find things to do myself. I did actually break my ankle in September 2013, so a couple of months after Sandra's JOS. So I was out of action from that and spent the best part of the following year rehabilitating that. And so the next event I actually did was Open Adventures inaugural Lakes in a Day in October 2014, which was 50 miles, 13,000 feet of ascent from Coldbeck in the North Lakes to Cartmel in the south. And I completed it in, I think it was 19 hours and 45 minutes. Given that I didn't expect to finish it, I was delighted to do it, but I was exhausted at the end and I barely walk. In fact, I couldn't go up and downstairs properly the next day at all. But it was fantastic. And so, of course, then I wondered, well, what else I could do.
What's going through your head during the tough moments on the 50 milers, the 100-mile races, and the 190-mile Northern Traverse? When times do get dark, when mentally, you've been on your feet for 19 odd hours, if not longer, how do you persevere and get through those tough times? What's going on mentally? What are you telling yourself? What are you doing?
I think that varies depending on the event. So I think particularly on the Northern Traverse, that was the first multi-day event or continuous event done over multiple days. And I hadn't really experienced that level of sleep deprivation along with the physical fatigue. So as a junior doctor, you get plenty of sleep deprivation. You certainly did when I was a junior, but I hadn't experienced it along with the physical fatigue and the pain of blisters and all those other things that you learn that don't actually happen on the shorter events. So I was doing that because I was raising money for the brain tumour charity in Alan's memory. So when it got tough, I just reminded myself that I was there out of choice, and that people who suffered from brain tumour and their families are suffering a lot more and for a lot longer than I am. And also that pain from my blisters and aching limbs or whatever would heal. Many of the pains that they're experiencing won't. So minimizing in perspective my own problems helps you go from the one place to the next. I think there's plenty of things to think about, trying to focus on your own dashboard as well. How hydrated am I? Am I eating the right things? Is my navigation right? What's the next point? What's the next milestone I'm looking for? And you're breaking it down, just going from place to place, helps you then get through the whole thing. Lots of different techniques. When it came to doing the JOGLE, I employed some other techniques as well to sort of speak to my, I suppose, mentally speak to my subconscious mind and speak to my systems, and just assure them that, I did know, somebody who knew what they were talking about did actually know what was going on for them, and it was going to be all right. And could they please wind the pain scale back from 10 to 1 for a while so I could get through the next bit? And that amazingly did work for quite a long time. But then it does come to the point, certainly on the JOGLE, where it would just, I've never experienced anything like it. The pain would just sort of rapidly spiral out of control, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. And I basically needed to stop there and stop then. But yeah, so damping it down keeps the lid on the tin for a while. But then once it's off, there's no holding it back.
Let's talk a little bit more about JOGLE, because this is the longest multi-day extreme running challenge that you've undertaken, 875 miles running from John O'Groats to Land's End. In terms of the training and preparing your body, were you working with a running coach? Did you have a set training plan? How much time did you have to plan and prepare yourself for this challenge?
No, I didn't use a coach. Rightly or wrongly, I am my own coach. I'm really poor about routine. I'm really poor about running to somebody else's plan. So it's very much a case of listen to my body and know what I need to do. If you want to do a half marathon or a marathon, there are plenty of plans out there and ideas to guide you through it. But there are no guidebooks to help you to show you how to train for something like 875 miles, particularly the older you are. So there are very few texts for older ultra runners, particularly older female ultra runners. So I'd found out very early on that what was written was, didn't necessarily work for me. And so I would have to write my own book, as it were, of how to do it. I basically started by, I'm fundamentally an analyst. So I started by looking at what could possibly go wrong, basically. And I drew up a list of the things that were likely to go wrong. And amongst those, there are things that I have no control over and things that I do may have some control over. The likely things on a run of that length would be repetitive strain injury, in particular shin splints. I was going to do my run on the road, and I didn't run predominantly on road, so I would need to train on road. Obviously, doing something to look after my feet was going to be important. I've had a lot of problems over the years with blisters, but I'd also got a lot of practice with different techniques preventing blisters. So I needed to put time into that. Nutrition and hydration was going to be important, so I needed to look at that. Biggest two things, though, were going to be around the body's response to trauma of that nature, which are the body's response to any trauma is inflammation, acute inflammation, which obviously involves, as well as redness, swelling, and pain. It's particularly the swelling, redness, swelling, and heat. The swelling is the biggest problem, because once you've got that fluid in the tissues, not only particularly the lower legs, not only does it make your legs heavier. It also impairs oxygen transport to the muscles, and it predisposes to blister formation. So that was an issue for me. And I needed to be able to manage that sufficiently so that I could recover to get up and run again the next day. And ultimately, my run, we didn't know how long it was going to take, but it was 19 ultras back to back. So those were the things that I focused on. And what I decided I needed to do ultimately was to be able to run probably 40 miles a day, get up the next day and go and do exactly the same as if it was the first day I was doing it. And when I got to that point, I knew that I was ready to go. So, yeah, there's a lot more detail in each of those. I don't know if you want me to flesh out some of that.
One of the things that you talked about, and I'd love for you to expand on more, it's the trauma that you're putting your body through. It's your feet, it's your shins, it's the inflammation, it's the swelling. So after you've done a 40-mile day, what were you doing specifically in relation to helping you recover? So that, that 8 or 10 hour window you had between the ultras, what were you doing? Yeah.
Right. Well, I say 40-mile a day. That was to do with the training. That wasn't to do with the event itself. So when I was on the event, my first day I did 74 miles. The second day, I think it was something over 50. So it was a variable number of miles every day. The shortest day was the final day when I did 30. So it was a variable number of miles a day. The only fixed thing that I gave myself was I decided I needed a minimum of 6 hours downtime each night. So I was theoretically prepared to run from 6 a.m. to midnight, which I did on the first day. I think I did similar on the second day. But the second day was the day I'd started to get trouble with one of my shins, partly because the wind had been so awful on the first day. So specifically for recovery, it's attention to nutrition was the first thing. So making sure that I was eating and I was drinking and that I had a good balance of the macros. So as well as getting the carbs in to support me, then I had plenty of protein going in as well to support the repair that was required. To keep the inflammation at bay, I wore compression tights during the run, but I swapped those overnight for surgical stockings, which have a much higher compression rating. And I went to sleep at night with my legs literally 90 degrees up the wall of the motorhome that I'd hired. Clearly, they didn't stay up there all night. So what I'd done was piled quilts and pillows to one side so that when they fell down, they were still significantly elevated. So that kept the swelling out. And it certainly did. I have sort of before and after photographs from the evenings and the mornings, particularly after I was injured, and that certainly kept the swelling at bay.
Were you taking any supplements or anything? Were you taking anything like magnesium, vitamin C, arnica, anything to help like that?
No, I have some osteoarthritis. I have some degenerative change in my left knee, so I do take glucosamine and chondroitin, which I've taken for the whole time I've run, and it's never got any worse in that time. But that comes back from I've had 2 operations on each of my knees, in fact, so 4 ops in total, and I have the shock absorber cartilage, the meniscus. I don't have much of that in one knee, and probably a little bit more in the other. But the knees. So I take glucosamine and chondroitin for those. I do take vitamin C, but no, I wasn't using magnesium. So electrolytes would have been in the technical fluid that I was using. So I used a product from Team Nutrition called Boom, their hydrate product. I find that works really well.
What would be your snacks that you were having, and did you have like a main meal at the end of the day? Like, how did it work?
Snacks. It was one. it was one huge eating feast from John O'Groats all the way down. I mean, that was one of the great things about it. I never lost my appetite. Although, did my tastes change? Yeah, I did eat things that I would never have considered eating in normal times. That's for sure. So I had things like porridge for breakfast, which I had some supplementary protein in. And that was my first breakfast. And then there might be bacon and egg sandwiches. There might be pasta meals, salmon, all sorts of things featured. I had, prior to going to John O'Groats, I'd spent in the previous 6 to 8 weeks, I had batch cooked and frozen huge numbers of meals, because for me, on an event like that, you can't survive on, and you shouldn't survive on, snacks and technical intake. You need those as well, but you need proper food. You need good 3 meals a day, because that's what your body is used to doing. In fact, I'd done a lot of science went into it. My crew the logistics for something like this are enormous. Just under 2 years from the decision to do this to the date of doing it. And I'd given myself 18 months to train. But alongside that, the logistics and planning for something like JOGLE are probably more than the training time itself, from sorting out the route, how long it's likely to take, finding crew, or hoping people will volunteer, producing maps, organising the tracking devices, writing the instructions for people as to what to expect you might need. Because at the end of the day, on something like this, your crew is there to not only to support you, but to keep you safe. So as an example, I would weigh myself before and after runs and note the air temperature. And I found that for some bizarre reason, I don't know why, but physiologically, when the air temperature gets to 22 degrees, my sweat output doubles. So I can go for the same run at 15 degrees or 17 degrees, and then again at 22 degrees, and I will find that I've lost twice as much weight after the higher temperature run than the lower temperature run. And I did things like that because I wanted to be able to say to the crew, I need this much fluid over this many miles, because they would be monitoring what my intake was, how often they would be filling my bottles. And I could say that I need double that amount if it gets hot. And in fact, it did, because we had horrendous weather in Scotland. And when we hit Cumbria, the sun came out and it was unseasonably hot through Cumbria, Lancashire, Cheshire and Shropshire. And then it got wet again. And we actually ended up, by the time we got to Land's End, we actually were running into a North Atlantic storm. It was supposed to have come in at 4 o'clock and it came in at 2 o'clock. And I'd planned to get there before it arrived, but unfortunately we had a number of borderline hypothermic people having run the last 6 or 7 miles in this horrible wet storm. Yeah, so the logistics is enormous. So anybody taking on something like this really needs to think hard about all of these things, because that's, the make or break. That's the success of the whole exercise.
How much did it cost you to do it?
Do you know, I wondered if you might ask me that. I can't actually tell you, because I never sat down and worked it out. The motorhome was the most expensive thing, I think, as a single item. But then on top of that, so that was a couple of £1,000. But then on top of that, I bought a whole load of kit. I think I had 10 pairs of shoes that I took with me. I didn't wear all of them. I think I wore 7 pairs. Because again, as part of managing potential swelling and the injuries that I had, I moved up. Not only did I move up a half a shoe size, but I also moved up width fittings as well. So I had to make sure I had those shoes on board that I could use. Then, of course, there's the cost of the food, and I covered the cruise costs of traveling and so on. One of the biggest parts of the whole thing, and one of the biggest headaches for the whole logistics, was the Guinness evidence gathering. That was Guinness are very specific and rigid about their requirements. And so just carrying a tracker that showed that you'd gone from one end of the country to another wasn't enough. So the crew were spending their time finding witnesses who could see me running by, taking photographs, videos, and so on. And keeping records of what I ate and drank, where I stopped. Every stop that you make, it needs to be recorded, because, of course, that might probably shows on the tracker that you've stopped for 5 minutes or so somewhere. So stops and starts. It's very intense for the crew. And of course, on a dark, wet night in the middle of in a little village in Scotland, there aren't people standing on the side of the road ready to bear witness to you passing by, which was quite different from coming through into. I was arriving on the Scotland-English border by some friends, which was a delight. And then I had company right the way through, pretty much to Cheshire, but coming through Cumbria and Kendal and Lancaster, where I know people. I had so many people come out to see me who were following it on the tracker. It ran into a number of hundreds of people. I was overwhelmed by the support that I had. And of course, it actually slowed me down because I felt I wanted to stop and talk to everybody as well. Not stop, but walk and talk to people. So that it did slow me down rather. And it can be quite exhausting doing that as well. By that point, I'd run over 400 miles. And I guess I was mentally getting quite tired.
One of the things that many people can end up saying throughout their life is, oh, I can't do that. I'm too old. What advice would you have for people who maybe think that they are too old to take on a new challenge or to have a new dream? What would be your advice to them?
Well, first and foremost, you're never too old to set a new goal or a new dream. Yeah. Many people, and I've certainly heard it said many times, oh, if I had my time over again, I would do X, Y, and Z. Well, you can do those things now. You don't have to have your time over again. It may not look as it would have done when you're in your 20s or your 30s, but whether it's learning a language, going to play netball or football, there are walking netball groups, walking football groups. You can take up running. I'd love everybody to take up running. It's one of the healthiest things that you can do, but it's not everybody's cup of tea. There are so many activities you can do, and it's not just about physical activity. It's also about social activity. Anything that gives you a feel-good factor, keeps you occupied, and gives you social contact is fantastic. And the more we can improve and increase our social contacts and friends as we get older, then the better an older age we will actually have.
So what's one of your new goals, new dreams? What do you want to achieve in the next 20 years?
Ideally, COVID has had a devastating effect, really. The whole point of doing the JOGLE was to try and get some traction for the message that I wanted to deliver, to reach people, to encourage people to take their own small steps, whatever they might be, to a healthier quality of life as they age. But unfortunately, with COVID, we've ended up at the moment having to set the social enterprise dormant. But I'd really like to revisit that and get that going and get the technology to raise enough money to get set up the technology to support it, so that we can provide a trusted resource of information and education, and provide the challenges and peer support that people and group support that people need. And actually, COVID has clearly demonstrated that the issues that I'm concerned about, which I'm not sure I've actually mentioned really, but things like long-term conditions, which, things like obesity, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, heart and lung disease, and so on. 15 million people are affected by these. And over the age of 60, it's 60% of people have at least one long-term condition. And that's not because they suddenly get these things when they're 60. It's the consequences of the lifestyle choices that they've made earlier in life. And 70% of the whole NHS budget prior to COVID, and it's changed drastically now, but 70% of that whole budget was spent on looking after people with long-term conditions. So going forward, I'd like to see some way of trying to change that and contribute in some way to reducing the burden on individuals and their families of them having long-term conditions. So it's partly about providing information for people. It's partly about sharing what it is I do that may, if it inspires one person to change some aspects of their lifestyle, then I guess that's a bit of the way towards my job being done. The whole idea is that I want to carry on running. So my challenge for this year is that How achievable it's going to be, I'm not sure, because I've not been able to travel to the big hills due to lockdowns, travel restrictions. But on the 6th of June, I'm planning to run the 62 highest Lake District peaks continuously back to back. And I've been challenged to do that in 62 hours. So that's because I'm 62 this year. So it's 62 at 62 in 62. And hopefully by doing that, I can share some of the aspects of it, which are lots of small goals along the way that may help inspire or encourage other people to take up some of the challenges that the goals and dreams that they have covered in dust on a shelf.
How are you feeling about that challenge?
At the moment, I'm actually very anxious because I spent 18 months training on road to run the JOGLE, and having come off with COVID coming off the back of that, had started to gain some momentum after that. But then when COVID shut everything down last year, I've basically not been able to get in the hill training. I didn't even decide to do the 62 until it didn't even figure until December, and I wasn't expecting us to then be locked down for another 3 months. So I've got basically, it's 10 weeks this weekend. I'll need to taper beforehand. We can start to travel next Monday, so I can start to travel into those hills. I will have about 7 weeks, really, realistically, to go and get some hill work in my legs. It's 116 miles at 45,000 feet of ascent. I am feeling rather anxious. But, I have said I'm going to do it, and on that date. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. It's not a challenge if you know you can do it. And I may not, if I don't achieve it on the first attempt, then I will just have to have another go. But it'll be fun. I have a number of good friends who are planning to come out and support me, come onto the hill with me, and it'll be great. After this lockdown, it will just be so lovely to see all these people come together from different parts of the country, and we'll just have a good crack on the hills, and hopefully we will achieve it, and it'll be brilliant.
What date is that again?
I'm starting on Sunday, the 6th of June.
Sunday, the 6th of June.
Yes. So, yes, it's as you can hear, I'm a little bit bewildered by whether I can get myself. I'm still carrying injury from the JOGLE. I'm still got high hamstring tendinopathy and a bit of sciatic irritation, which is literally pain in the rear. But you can't let things stop you. I've got things as it is. Races cancelled last year, have yet again been cancelled this year. There's plenty of other stuff that I would like to do. I've got the Lakeland 100 at the end of July, so I can't really move the date of the 62 because I'll only have 6 weeks to recover from that before I've got the Lakeland 100 at the end of July.
Angela, how can people follow along with you, follow along with your future runs, especially your 62 for your 62nd, which starts on the 6th of June? Where should they go?
I have a website, which is www.therunningGranny.co.uk. I am on Facebook at The Running Granny. I'm on Instagram at The Running Granny. And on Twitter, which I don't really use very much, I'm at running_granny. There's a link via my website as well on the front page. There's a link to a GoFundMe page if anybody would be interested in or kind enough to wish to donate towards us getting Going for Old up and running as the social enterprise that I hope that it will become.
Fantastic. And Angela, I'd love for you to leave our listeners with final words of advice, final words of wisdom for other women out there who want to try something new, who want to get fit, want to get active, want to, get outside more, want to put health as their number one priority. What advice would you have for them?
You're only here once. And like my 20 ways to kill an idea, you can raise an idea amongst your friends, and you may well receive 20 ways to kill an idea from them. I think you have to you have to try to shrug that off and be curious about whatever it is you would like to do. I'm nothing special. Einstein said, I have no special talents. I'm only passionately curious. And I think in some ways, not that I'm an Einstein, I'm certainly not, but I am passionately curious and I want to know more. And I know these things are out there to do. So it's a question of the biggest step you'll take is having the courage to take the step towards starting something. There can be few things that you might want to do where you wouldn't be able to find some information about how to get started on the internet. So I would do that. I would also find some trusted friends or acquaintances who know about what it is that you want to do. I have 3 wise men, as I call them, and for every daft idea that I come up with, I speak to them, because you have a certain amount of knowledge of what you do, but other people will often see your potential, and in their experience of whatever your ambition is, they are likely to know whether you have the capability of doing it, and importantly, to point you towards the right things that you need to do and the information you need to learn in order to go about it. So my 3 wise men have not yet said no to any of my daft ideas, but have been there behind me all the way, supporting me and helping me to achieve them. They know more about me and what my capabilities are than I do. So find those people and they will be only too keen to help you, I'm sure. And if I can help anybody, then with anything that I've said, particularly around if they're planning a big event and they'd like some ideas around logistics and planning, I'm proposing to offer a service for a small donation to my social enterprise, because I've done all this work. If it saves other people reinventing the wheel, then that would be great.
Thank you so much for coming on Tough Girl Podcast and sharing more about your journey and your passion for running. And massive congratulations again on running JOGLE. It's a phenomenal achievement, running 875 miles in 18 days, 10 hours and 3 minutes. Just so inspiring, and best of luck with your next challenge, which I know people will be following along and supporting you with.
That's really kind, Sarah. Thank you ever so much for having me on. And if anything I've said helps anybody else to improve their quality of life and their health, then that's great.
Hey tribe, I hope you enjoyed the episode with Angela, aka the Running Granny. What an absolute inspiration. For those of you who are new to the Tough Girl Podcast, my name is Sarah Williams. I'm the host of the Tough Girl Podcast and the founder of Tough Girl Challenges, which is all about motivating and inspiring you while increasing the amount of female role models in the media. The Tough Girl Podcast is sponsorship and ad-free, and that's thanks to the monthly financial support of patrons. To find out more about supporting the Tough Girl Podcast and helping to increase the amount of female role models in the media, please visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. All patrons will get their name on a dedicated patrons page on the Tough Girl website, and all female patrons $5 and above are invited to join the closed Facebook group, the Tough Girl Tribe. You can sign up monthly in euros, US dollars and sterling, and there is also an annual option where you get a 10% discount if you sign up annually. New episodes of the Tough Girl Podcast go live every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 a.m. UK time, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out.